I know you were listening into this. I know you've been following this conversation. What's your reaction to the downgrade?
Well, I must say the cognitive dissonance that I think many felt from this downgrade was not at all diminished, and in fact was amplified from the discussion I just heard. Nonpartisans described the Fitch decision, I'm quoting from things that were said yesterday and today, as bizarre, inept, arbitrary, absurd, strange, puzzling timing, which I thought you got at a little bit. Look, Fitch relies on a quantitative model in which creditworthiness deteriorated significantly under President Trump, and for good reasons. They give governance a significant weight. If you look at the movements in that model under President Biden, as soon as he got here, it started to track back up towards AAA. So the timing here makes no sense. If you think about the kind of bipartisan measures that this president has presided over, whether we're talking about the bipartisan infrastructure law, the PACT Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, and particularly the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which not only resolved the debt ceiling in an overwhelmingly bipartisan manner, but took along $1 trillion in deficit reduction with it, the decision just seems, as I said, just bizarre and arbitrary and against even their own estimates.
Jared, I understand that you see this as a lagging indicator, but how do you address Fitch's concerns about the rising government deficit? Because that's really fundamentally what this is about.
So I think, again, the timing issue is germane here. The deficit went up every year under President Trump. The debt to GDP ratio rocketed under President Trump. It has stabilized, admittedly, at a higher level under this president, but we're doing all we can to try to ameliorate those tensions. And the proof is in both the movements in actual deficits, down $1 trillion under the president's watch thus far. And then, as I just mentioned, another $1 trillion of deficit reduction in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Then look at the budget. The president proposes $2.6 trillion in deficit reduction over the next 10 years. So we are doing our best to try to address these fiscal issues because they matter a lot to this president, and he has a solid track record on that front. So the idea that you would then somehow fail to do this under the prior administration when these fiscal measures were massively deteriorating and then go a notch down when we're not only trying to move in the other direction, but actually having some success in moving in the other direction, it makes no sense.
So, Jared, then, I mean, one reaction to the Treasury Secretary's statement was that we were caught off. What caught our attention was the implication that Fitch was playing politics. And I guess I'm wondering, how much do you believe the administration will lean into that? And does that preclude the ability to find further negotiation, further bipartisan consensus regarding these things in the future?
We are going to continue to work for bipartisan consensus on these matters. There are Democrats and Republicans who recognize the need for the kinds of fiscal consolidation that the president has put forth in his budget. Now, we're going to have a lot of arguments about how to get there, no question. He obviously has a very progressive tax plan, which emphasizes taxing wealth and relieving relieving work, and that's a balance that's very important to him. But we can have that argument. I don't want to get into who's political and who isn't here. I do think the timing is just very strange in the ways I said. Basically, Fitch seems to be punishing the cleanup crew when the guy who wrecked the room is long gone. So I'm not getting that.
Are your eyes on Moody's and what they may do?
Well, we're always going to be paying attention to the rating agencies, but much more attention are being paid to, of course, financial markets and how they're reacting. And I think both in 2011 when this occurred and in this case, investors are a much better judge of the reliability, the safety, the critical importance in financial markets of safe, reliable American debt. And their vote and their analysis is miles more important than that of Fitch. And thus far, we think that they have understood that the quality and safety of U.S. debt remains pristine as ever.
So given the timing of this, do you think there will be an impact on the debt markets? And what's your message to investors right now?
Well, I don't think that we from the White House typically message investors. They're going to look at the things they're going to look at. I think what our job is to do is to make sure that the overall economy is expanding in a way that doesn't just hit the macro targets, but reaches American households. So when we have a GDP that came in 2.4% in the second quarter, but we also have real wages growing and the unemployment rate below 4% for over a year and a half, when we continue to generate record job numbers, again, on behalf of American households, giving the middle class some real breathing room with inflation coming down 2/3 from its peak, we've got more work to do, but that's what our focus is on. We're not trying to time the market, manipulate the market, or even, on a daily basis, look into it all that closely. What our job is to do is to make sure that we have a sound, growing macroeconomy that's reaching American households. That's at the core of Bidenomics. And frankly, at least with the recent data flow, I think we're having some success.
So, Jared, at this point, is your focus on seeing continued declines in inflation, or are you looking at Atlanta Fed 3.5 for Q3 and focusing on prolonged growth, even though that might make these last 100 basis points of CPI more difficult?
Well, I think to get a beat on where inflation is going, you really have to kind of take it apart. And if you look at the various components, so if you look at, say, core goods inflation, that's been coming in considerably lower than it did a year ago. And that's because we see supply chains unsnarled. That's obviously an important part of this. If you look at housing inflation, that's rolled over in the CPI in terms of rent and owner-occupied rent. Those measures have come in considerably lower than they did, and that's expected to keep going. And that leaves, gas, food, and services. So on the services front, that's a pretty labor-intensive part of the index. As the labor market cools, we should see some easing there, and we've seen some of that. Energy and food inflation has also come in recently. So look, we have to watch every one of those trends. We're not really in the business of forecasting month to month, but if you look at the forecasters out on the street, they generally do have these trends broadly persisting.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Jared, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.